Hey, what's up, San Diego Rep family? I'm Kim Heil. I'm the associate producer and casting director for San Diego Rep. Tonight is Talkin Theater, the online edition. So I'm going to have a really special guest on who I'm going to welcome in just a moment. Here we the fabulous, the one and only. I'm trying to time this. So that by the time I say his name, his face shows up. The incredibly insightful and handsome and talented and articulate and brilliant. And maybe he's doing this on purpose. So I just keep going and just keep talking him up. I am going to have to ask him about his Instagram handle, though. That's an interesting name to use. Okay, let's see. Something going on here? Something's going on. It's waiting for you, Filbert. People are like, who's Filbert? I thought you were talking to someone else. But actually, hey, do you see? I know you're on. I did add you. Here we go. All right, let's try this again. Hopefully you're getting something on your screen.
I'm so sorry, Kim. Here I am. Apologies. I'm new at this Instagram Live, but I'm here, full force.
Yay!
I did it on purpose for a little bit, and then I was like,
you did.
Oh, shoot, now I'm technically out of my desk.
Now you're just late to the party.
I know. Hi.
So, hi. How you doing?
I'm hanging in there, you know. It's crazy times, but I feel like we're all maintaining, and I'm really grateful that I have a beautiful girlfriend that I live with, and a new little dog that's in my life, and my family is well and healthy, and they live in Los Angeles. You know, I haven't seen them since this whole thing went down, but I think I'm taking a drive over, and we're gonna do some social distance, like visiting on the lawn next week.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
So
for everyone who's just joining us, I was just about to introduce, and I was trying to be dramatic about it. I was leading in with all these superlatives, which were all true. I'll say it again. The amazing, wonderful, talented, and handsome Jesse Perez. Woo!
Thank you so much.
It's a whole new world, right? Like I have to supply the sound effects and everything. But dear sir, you're looking very good on camera, might I say.
Oh, well, thank you. I feel like it's like the natural lighting of San Diego, you know. I have a nice window in my office. That's it.
I see. Yeah, natural lighting San Diego is good, but I'll tell you, I actually my family purchased a ring light. And then both my kids were like, are we TikTokers now? Are we YouTubers now? We got a ring light. This is official.
Yeah. It's really happening. We're getting all the gadgets and all the stands and all the microphones because it's like the new norm, you know?
It really is. It really is. So listen, Jesse, I want to use this as an opportunity to learn more about you because you're relatively new to San Diego still.
1 year.
1 year, and you are currently the head of the grad acting department, the MFA department at USD, which is in partnership with the Old Globe. But the reason I'm also interviewing you is because you joined the San Diego Rep family as a director of our upcoming production of Chris Franco's 57 Chevy.
Oh, I'm so excited about that. I can't. Yeah.
So thrilling. And you know what's funny is that I actually, maybe because I hadn't met you yet. Obviously, I'd worked with Sophia, your girlfriend. She was in our production of A Doll's House Part 2.
Yeah.
I had thought you were from the East Coast, and I didn't know that you had this whole LA background.
I did. You know, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I left when I was 18, and then it all happened out east. But I boomeranged back around, you know,
That's
and eventually
right.
I ended up out here and closer to the family, which is really good during this time.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your life in LA as a young actor. Did you find theater and acting in LA?
That's a crazy question. I started off as a dancer, Kim, and
What?
I
Okay,
did. I
I
mean,
gotta
yeah,
get my
yeah.
book now. I'm moving your headshot to my dancer book now.
Well, I don't know about dance calls anymore, but back in the day, before I started speaking any text or anything, or even getting, trained as an actor, I literally was in this recreational dance company called Kids Exclusive, which I
Oh,
think was a little like takeoff of Kids Incorporated, which were the famous
yes.
on television sort of performing
Mhm.
group. But we would just like literally lip sync and do like Broadway dance numbers. But like
Oh,
we never like sang. It was just and we got this huge following back in the day. And eventually we got hired by the Mouse. Disney kind of contracted us to do their Magic Music Days. And I started doing a bunch of dancing, like at the Carnation Land Plaza, stuff like that. And eventually I looked at the director of this company or performance group, I would call it. And I said, hey, I don't want to really just dance, and wear tights. I want, which ended up happening anyways, because chances
right.
are they all wear tights. But I ended up telling him, and he was like, well, what do you want to do? And I basically was like, I want to be like Charlie Chaplin. And my father used to show me Charlie Chaplin films when I was a kid, because he spoke Spanish. And even to this day in the household, it's nothing but Spanish out here in Los Angeles. And so I remember watching these films with my father, and, it was universal. He was Mexican and enjoying this man just do this magic trick, basically. And so I told this to the director of this company, and he basically goes, oh, well, that's dancing. And I was like, I think something else is going on. I don't like what we do is not that. And I
Ah.
think he's telling a story. And this
Mhm.
guy, he had the wherewithal to take me to the Stella Adler Conservatory of Acting West in Hollywood.
Oh yeah,
And
I took classes there.
yeah, totally. Well, you know what yeah, Hollywood Boulevard, and
Yep.
back in the day, and it
Yep.
moved around a bit. But eventually, Stella was still running it then, and I showed up, and they just gave me a run for my money and flipped my brain around, and I was like, this is what I want to do the rest of my life.
How old were you when you did that?
Oh man, I was like, I'd say right before like 14.
14.
14 years old. And luckily, they had a teenage department. Like, I wasn't the only one that was thinking, oh, Stella Adler. There was already something in place. So I started studying with this teenage group. And believe it or not, like one of our first plays we worked on was The Children's Hour by
Oh,
Lillian Hellman. And
yeah.
as you know, there's not a lot of like young boys in that, but there was mostly girls because it's theater.
Right.
And so I had to play a girl, a young girl in, middle school, and kind of play, but what Sandra Tucker said, who was the teacher at the time, basically said, hey, these women are written really powerfully that it could be played by a young man. And I was like, so my brain was already like, what am I stepping into? And I just, I couldn't afford it, Kim. So I ended up going to the Los Angeles County High School for the Arts.
Yeah.
I auditioned for LOXA, and
Yeah.
I got in. And, one of the questions they asked me was like, hey, what's one of your favorite plays? And I was like, The Children's Hour by Lillian Hellman. And their mind was blown. But I was just on this trajectory of just learning and discovering great American plays.
Wow.
And so I became this American actor, kind of accidentally, but I just kept working. I was just like, I want this. I want to figure it out. After high school, I auditioned for like 12 programs because, it's what I wanted to do. And I got into Juilliard, and I went there. And the
Wow.
rest was history. That's what took me out east when I was 18. And I just stayed out there. And then this new position over at the Old Globe USD brought me back.
Yeah. Well, let me take it back a little bit because I
Yeah.
am curious about how your family reacted to you discovering your love for acting. Because I mean, I know for myself as a person of color, my parents are like, what? I don't know
Yeah.
about that. And I'm curious if you had a similar experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, they were very supportive and, but they were supportive of me playing sports, of me wanting to, do whatever I wanted. But I feel like secretly they were like worried, they were like, what is this guy doing? But I mean, I think what happened was they started seeing some of the performance, even as a kid. And my father mostly was like, what's happening? Like, there's so many people gathering and they're starting to form some sort of following. Is this a possibility to make money and actually be a profession? And believe it or not, I felt like he got behind it. I mean, of course, the jump of being some dancer and then going to be an actor, he was kind of like, okay, but like I said, it was too expensive, Kim. So even him at one point was like, hey, I don't know how we do this. And so
Yeah.
that's when I found the public school. You didn't have to pay for Laksa. So it was just like a gem, and he supported me. And of course, I was a crazy teenager, and he got me this really cheap car, like a Toyota, and
That's the next play you're directing for us.
yeah,
It's
totally. I
the
got the Toyota
85
Corolla.
Toyota,
Yeah,
something
yeah.
like that.
So I get this Toyota, and like within a month, I flip it in the freeway during a rainstorm. And so, of course, like my father started like losing trust, but I was always a good student. Math kind of always escaped me, but other than that, I felt like they were supportive because I always did my homework,
Yeah.
and I always came back with good grades, regardless of any sort of extracurricular activity I was doing.
Do you
So
have siblings?
I do. I have two older brothers, none of them in the arts, but both of them are superheroes in my eyes. One's a social worker that works with abused children, and the other one's in pharmaceuticals and delivers medicine to the elderly over
Wow.
all through East LA and Pico Rivera. So they're just amazing, and they're both working right now. So, and I have a job, and it's like, what's
Yeah.
happening? So it's really cool, both older
Yeah.
brothers.
And so your discovery of the arts, was that fairly new in your family, or had you had like extended family or relatives who had done some kind of performing arts?
Well, I think my brothers were both into music. My eldest brother, Raul, he changed his name to Roxy at one point for a variety of reasons, which I won't get into. But eventually, he had an electric guitar, and he would wear bandanas and like jam, and I was like, oh shit, what's going on? And eventually, my brother Eddie got really into music, and across the street we had this neighbor named Ralph, and he was an awesome musician. He was a war veteran and just really quiet. Always wore this crazy pompadour, even as he got older. And eventually he started teaching my middle brother Eddie the bass.
Hmm.
And my brother Eddie just took off and loved it, and he started joining bands, and so there was music in my life all the time. And eventually Ralph called me over and he's like, hey, do you want to start learning some music? And I was like, sure. And he had a drum set, and I started learning the drums, Kim, and I started getting into it, and I started growing and stuff. But the thing that he would make me do is he would make me take this drum set into the basement to put it away. And I was such a scaredy cat that I would go down there and get so freaked out with the dark,
Oh dear.
and I couldn't tell him. So I just was like, I don't like playing the drums. When I
Oh no.
when I loved it, I totally loved it, but because my fear, like, and not even the fear of being a musician or playing music, it was the fear of the dark, of putting the drums away in the bass. It was totally terrible.
Oh my goodness.
But anyways, music always, not that made me jump ship from music, the fear of the dark, but I think it was always in there that all of us always liked, performing for people or entertaining people.
Yeah, for sure. So when you were a senior, or I guess you started auditioning for your training, your college programs
Yeah.
when you were a senior.
Yeah.
Did you know at that point that you wanted to move to New York, or were there people telling you, oh yeah, you gotta apply to Juilliard, you gotta, audition for this school and that school?
Yeah, I was really green, I knew the name, but like, I didn't have the wherewithal to like study up and look up stuff, and the internet was fairly new, and I was just like, what's happening? So I just kind of, gambled, and I knew I wanted to do it. So I think that's why I went and auditioned for 12 different programs all across the country. I think I knew I wanted to go to New York, and there was actually a professor at Juilliard named Penny Gerald, who's actually a really famous actor on TV, and she went to Juilliard,
Okay.
and she was a person of color that was just tremendous as an educator. And to be honest, you know, Kim just kicked my butt up and down as as a discipline of the art. You know, like was like, nope, not enough, not good enough. Nope, don't believe it, don't buy it. Hey, why don't you do something physical, get all that energy out, and then just tell the truth? You know, and I was like, who is this woman and where did she come from? Once again, women guiding me through this, you know, career or arc of a career. And eventually she was like, I went to Juilliard. And I said, how do I go there? And she goes, work your butt off. And I was like, okay. So I just kept working. And eventually that was one of the schools on the list. And literally it was like working my butt off, because I remember when I auditioned in like 1995, they had me do like 8 monologues at my Juilliard audition.
Do people do that now?
I don't know. No, I remember holding auditions for Juilliard, and I mostly did them in New York. I didn't go on the recruitment tour as they did as of late. But
Okay.
you know, we would see them, and it would be like 2-minute monologues and 4 minutes, and then they'd be like, "Hey, thank you very much," or we'd have them sing, and then if we saw something, we would give them a call back. You know, I don't know how they do it now because Evan Unolis runs the program now.
Right.
And I know that there's some changes that are being made, just like there is at USD. And so, you know, it was just an interesting thing because when I went there, Michael Kahn looked at me, and it was Michael Kahn, Liz Smith, and John Sticks, and they were on the road in San Francisco where I auditioned. And Michael just kept looking at me and saying, you got anything else? You got anything else? And eventually I was like, oh my God, I'm going through my whole repertoire. And
Wow.
luckily, the last thing that I did was something that was like, I picked up early on. It was this little piece called Living at Home, and it was about a brother. And I have 2 brothers, as you know, and it's about this brother who can't leave the nest, basically, and has lost his job and is considered a loser. And his mother is passing away upstairs out of a terminal illness, and she passes away. And the brother basically tells a story of why he can't let go. And he recalls this story of this going upstairs and seeing his mother in this white nightgown the night before she passed. And I like, even right now, I connected to it in a way that I never thought I would. Sure, exhaustion, sure, anxiety, fear, the fact that I was there with strangers showing my heart. And eventually I was like, hey, this is the last shot. This is also the last monologue I have. And I just went for it in a way that I never went before. And I lost it, you know, and I completely like melted into my seat because I was sitting down. And I remember Michael just saying, hey, you don't have to do anything else now. So just let it out and we're done. And I was like, oh man. And of course I left and I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. And I got a call back. And of course I had to do other things in the callback. So there you go, you know, but it was just a beautiful, I mean, it's hard work, you know, and I feel like that's what I've always learned at all these, like, you know, signposts along the way, that you got to work harder. No, give me more. Not enough. What else do you have in the tank? You know?
Yeah.
And I feel as people of color, we have to do that tenfold sometimes.
I agree.
You know? And so, because it's not about proving ourselves, it's that thing beyond it. It's like, how do I trust you?
Yeah. Yeah. How was it transitioning from the West Coast life into being a student in New York?
Oh man. It's very different, right? Like the energy,
Right.
I feel like I'm back here and I'm like, wow, my shoulders have dropped a couple of inches just because I'm more relaxed.
Yeah.
I feel like the energy of New York is so fast. So I had this West Coast laid back, I don't know, LA surfer, you know, gangster from East LA mix and the whole thing, you know? So I kind of went out there and I was 18 and I didn't know anything, you know? And I thought literally, I was like, I'm a grown, oh, come on, I'm turning into a man. And not only in training, in life, you know, I remember the same man who took me to the Stella Adler Conservatory. He came out with me and flew me out, you know, because he was
Oh, wow.
to follow my career, and he flew me out to New York. and he helped me move into the dorm. And I was the first year, and there was like orientation happening. And, you know, we would meet up during the day and do things throughout the city, go to Central Parks, you know. So eventually one day he was like, hey, let's go see this movie, Basquiat. You know, it was when, yeah, Jeffrey Rush was coming up and all of that. So we went, and I went to go see it, and it blew my mind, you know, and it kind of gave me an aspect of New York that I wasn't quite informed about. And so it was not only art and visual art, it was just this freedom. And eventually we got to the steps of Lincoln Center, and he was like, all right, I gotta go now. I fly in like 3 hours, so I'm gonna start taking the subway. And I was like, wait a minute, you're leaving? And it hadn't dawned on me, you know, I guess I was a kid, and I was like, this thing's never gonna end. I'm always gonna be able to check in with this guy. And he left. And I was there in the middle of Lincoln Center, this amazing, amazing cultural center. And I just fell to tears. And I was like, what do I do? Like, I was literally a kid, you know, and I was like, oh my God, somebody give me a class. Where's the next meeting? When do I, you know? And so little by little, I started realizing that, you know, we're all alone in this world, but like what you make of it is beautiful. Because then, of course, I started getting a routine. Of course, I had to figure out what I did with my time off before I did anything like actually work, you know? So it became this thing of like, how do I live, and what are my interests, and how do I spend my time?
Yeah. And I'm assuming too that you found the community of Juilliard and that they helped you to assimilate into that New York life.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was cutthroat, you know, it was really, you know, challenging, and it was really competitive, and all my classmates were really good, you know, so it was just like, man, we're all just clawing at this. But there was a hunger, you know, that I was like, I'm so happy I'm here. All of them were super beautiful, you know, and then there's like another 3 classes above us, and I'm like, oh my God, everybody's beautiful here. And, you know, and you start realizing that beauty has a lot of currency in this business, but also the fact that like just hard work, like we've been talking about, that eventually you just are persistent and you keep knocking, or you go further and further into the truth of how you tell stories that are personal to you, that then you just can't be denied, you know? And I learned that. I was like, man, I'm climbing the ranks here. And sometimes my classmates would look at me and be like, that was trash, or my professors. And eventually I'd be like, wow, that's a challenge, you know, as opposed to getting beat down and being like, oh man, I'm done, I don't know how to do this. I'd be like, oh yeah, well, wait till next time, you know? And in the theater, I feel like we've always had that, you know? And I don't mean to say it past tense, I just mean that it's not here right now, you know? Because it's like, okay, we're doing a performance. I go out there, I give it a swing for tonight, and sure, I'll get wherever I get to with that wrestling of that storytelling. And then the next day I get another shot. And the day after that, another shot, you know, so that I get to relive it in a new way, as opposed to it becoming stagnant and repetitive and boring, you know? So it's like, that's the artist. It's like every day I get a swing at this story. And, you know, professors have always, one in particular was always like, dedicate your performance, dedicate your storytelling to someone very specific every night and make it special. You know?
Wow. So in your time at Juilliard, and how many years was your program?
4 years.
4-year program. And was that considered a bachelor's degree then when you?
Yeah, that was it. That was a BFA. Yeah.
That was your BFA.
Yeah.
At some point in your BFA career, did you know you would become an educator as well as an artist?
No way. No, I felt like I was grinding so hard to get the next gig, you know, as an actor in New York or regionally even, you know, and but I was also working with directors that were really amazing, that I would seek out, you know, like I was like, oh, Mary Zimmerman seems like she's doing great work. Let me work with her and really work really hard for her and help her on developing what she's trying to do in the theater. And then she would rehire me. And so then I'd work with Mary Zimmerman for like 5 years, you know, and then I'd be like, wow, let me meet another mentor. Who do I want to work with now? You know, and I would seek someone else out, you know, Chris Bays, you know, Robert Woodruff. And I would get in their pockets and I would just be like, hey, what are you doing next? Or they'd be like, hey, kid, what are you up to, you know, in 2 months? And you would just,
Take me through that, because I think that's something that you talk about it as though it's easy, but
No,
it's actually incredibly intimidating to approach someone who has that stature in the field, right?
yep.
But you did it. So how did you do that?
I did it because I let the work speak for itself. You know, Kim, like you have to step in there with the work first. And once that happens and the director or the creator or the theater maker all of a sudden is like, oh, there's that trust.
Mm.
All of a sudden I can see this young artist and I can shape him through the years. And I can actually, even though people say that there are no companies in America, directors have people that they love working with.
Absolutely.
And so if you get into that circle with certain directors, years may pass and eventually they'll remember you and be like, hey, Jesse, you know, it's Woodruff. It's been a couple of years, but I'm doing this new thing with Bill Camp. Are you available? And of course you're like, wow, let me just rearrange my entire life to try to make this fit,
Yes,
you know?
right.
And it just, you know, you accumulate people like that and you realize that those people are educating you all the way through your career. And that's why you like working with them, because you're growing, they're passionate, they're still inspiring you, it's not stagnant. And so all of a sudden you're like, how do I do what they do? And
Yeah.
you start sitting in on rehearsals that you're not called for. You start shadowing things. You start asking them, hey, where do you teach? Robert Woodruff teaches an amazing Greek class, not only Greek theater class,
Right.
not only to directors, but also brings in the actors afterwards and is there in real time as the directors work with their company, with the actors at Yale. So I was like, let me just work at Yale so I could fit in that class. So then my actions were telling me what was happening, you know? And believe it or not, what actually got me teaching at Juilliard from the transition and of going there as a student in the theater was movement and dance. All of a sudden, one of my mentors was like, hey, I got this amazing contract at Juilliard. And I had worked with him in movement in a different way. And he was like, and I want you to do the choreography for it and the movement work for it. And I was like, sure, man, whatever. And it was like John Barton's Greeks. And it was a 3-year contract, Kim.
Wow.
Like literally we would go in there and like for 2 months develop 3 Greek plays and then show them. And it would be like a 4-hour endeavor. And of course, you know, people would come and be like, wow, I've seen enough, but it was art. You know, and that's what Jim Houghton believed in when he was running theater, the Juilliard. And so he gave us that gig and we worked our faces off. And little by little, Jim started stepping into those rehearsals and would see how I would work during my movement sessions with the students and was like, what the heck is going on? You know? So little by little, they started pulling me in at Juilliard. Hey, why don't you come do this reading and this and that. And eventually we did another year with Brian Murtis was the colleague that I was working with that gave me the choreography gig. And then he became head of directing at Brown.
Oh.
And so they offered him something at Juilliard simultaneously. They basically were like, hey, why don't you come direct this second year project that you can develop and, you know, devise and it's all yours. And he was like, oh, you know what? I'm doing this gig now, but why don't you ask Jesse Perez?
Ah.
And it was literally like him being like, hey, man, why don't you go do this? And it was the first time I started directing. I started developing work on my own, devising with you know, playwrights mashing up their work, their one acts and trying to intertwine. And it was just creating, you know, because it was insular, because it was an educational process. No tickets were sold. We were in a studio. And sometimes if the playwrights were living, we would invite them and they would come see it and they'd be like, what the hell is going on in here? You know? And so little by little, Kim, I just started finding my voice. You know? And that's when I was like, maybe I can teach, and maybe I am one of those directors that is treated as a mentor and they just get investigated by young people and say, well, how do you do what you do? You know? And I mean, I don't want to take that responsibility on. I have a lot, I'm still learning. I will forever learn, you know, but it just became that thing when all of a sudden there was an opening at Juilliard and Jim thought of me and was like, hey, well, what have you been dreaming about in a classroom? What would you like to teach? And I, of course, being the man that I am and the artist that I am, I was like, I love the absurdists. I want to work on Beckett, you know, Genet, Ionesco. And Jim was like, okay, develop a class. And I was like, okay, great. I'm going to start with the first years. And Jim gave me Michael Kahn's third year master class, his acting class, because
Wow.
Michael was busy that year. And I was like, hey, I'm not developing, like I'm going straight. And so I was with the third years at Juilliard doing absurdist drama.
That's amazing.
And Crazy in Love and learning every year. And I developed that class for years. And then it led to the next thing and the next thing. And then here I am in San Diego, still dreaming of doing Beckett, you know?
And did you ever look at your journey and go, wait a second, I started this journey as an actor. Should I be focusing more on that and not as much on the educator part of it? Or were they always sort of symbiotic with each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I felt like I've always just listened, you know, and at times, sure, I've had to make really rough decisions on like, oh, here's my acting career and here's my, you know, being an educator, a professor career. And sometimes I would have to pivot on what I wanted at the time. Sometimes, of course, it was about money, you know, but eventually I just stopped thinking about it. And I was so lucky that all the gigs that I've done have supported my acting career. As a professor, I'm a professor of practice, you know, as a director of the Old Globe USD program. And they encourage me to actually go out and do the acting thing so that I bring back that sort of knowledge, you know, and stay in the field. I don't know if I could go out of town, you know, I love working in San Diego right now, but maybe, you know, as time goes on, maybe, you know, so, but I'm also really just thinking of acting, but I'm also being asked to direct, as you know, you know, and that's becoming so amazing that San Diego has embraced me in that way. And it hasn't skipped a beat in the way I like to work. You know, like I feel like I was worried that moving out here, my juices would slow down and I would lose, you know, my mojo for this amazing work all the time and working with amazing people and working with students. And it hasn't slowed down. You know, people are like, hey, why don't you do this reading? Why don't you come direct this? And I have to just thank San Diego Rep because they've been so supportive in that sense. Come do this reading, come work with the Latin X, you know, festival. And I've just been like learning as I go, you know, and learning who the community is because that's what it's about, you know, Kim. And I'm loving that I'm being embraced.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. It's just been so great working with you and collaborating with you. When you did the Seize the King at La Jolla Playhouse, did you already know you were moving here?
That was a crazy experience. You know, the timing of that was like, what is happening? But you know, it took a while to develop that piece, and they developed it in New York.
Okay.
So when they called me, you know, I was out in New York and teaching and trying to audition and stuff. And they called me for a workshop. And I went in for like a week. And, you know, I kind of knew Jaime. I've auditioned for him. And, you know, we fell in love in the audition room, but never had the chance to actually collaborate. And so he just offered me Richard. And he was like, hey, let's start here. You know, and I was like, oh, let's start here. Great. So I started reading King Richard and, little by little, he was like, hey, let's keep developing this. And Will Power was like, yeah, full throttle, bring him back. And they did like another workshop. And it was they were just trying to find the formula of who could speak that really difficult, dense text, you know?
Yeah.
And so we started getting a company together. They just kept exercising the play, basically, and trimming it and figuring out what it wanted to be. And as I was doing that second workshop, I started traveling to San Diego and basically starting interviewing for this job at USD. And so I was like, this is crazy that this is happening. And I remember even at one point when I was here at USD, I met up with like Jaime, you know, and we like talked. And so then I told him, I was like, hey, this job is up, but I don't think I'm going to get it. You know, I was like, why not?
Why not?
It was interesting, Kim, you know, I know there's people listening, you know.
No. Just talk freely.
I've never held a leadership position. So I feel like the Old Globe and USD, I mean, and the Shy League Graduate Theater Program are taking a big risk in being like, hey, we just trust this guy who I know has chops in the business, never has really led a program, but talks in this way of how to develop curriculum, and obviously was helping develop curriculum at Juilliard.
Right.
but that I was just like, hey man, I'm happy teaching at Juilliard. I'm happy auditioning in New York. I'm happy working as an actor. Sure, I don't have a lot of money. I'm living paycheck to paycheck. But at the end of the day, this is an opportunity. Let me give it a shot and audition, is what I thought, you know? And actually the way it was presented to me was I got a call from James Bundy, who is the dean of Yale and the director out there for YSD. And he basically was like, have you ever thought of, being the director of an MFA program? And I was like, no, you know, and he was like, well, wait a minute, I want to talk about this a little bit, because he also saw me do work there with Robert Woodruff at Yale, right? So then he was like, well, because what if you didn't have to leave your acting career? Like what you wanted to do would be intact. And this would just be another stepping stone. This is what really got me. Now we're really talking freely. He goes, this is what would be another stepping stone for you to run your own theater. And so I was like, hey, I never thought of it. I'm a gambler. I've always risked in my life. I got to tell you, James, if I do this, I'm going to do this 110%. And literally he goes, am I hearing you want to do this? And I was like, what do I do? And he goes, you're going to get a phone call and this is what's going to happen. And I got a phone call and it just started snowballing. But as it was happening, literally, I was like, my 110% compared to what other people are doing and other educators that have been in the business and have been doing it for so long and are masters of the craft. I was like, I don't, sure, let's do it. And when it started to, cinch down to the finalists, I was like, oh man, this could probably really happen, and I started to double back a little bit, and then the fear factor kicked in. But I was like, hey man, you said you would do it 110%. So shut up, keep going, and just do it. I mean, Barry Edelstein is a huge mentor of mine. He was a teacher of mine at Juilliard. He was the artistic director of Classic Stage Company for a while, and I did some work there under him, and then we've always stayed in contact, and he's always supported my classical work, which I think is huge, because I feel a lot of people really reserve classical work for white people,
right?
And when you get a mentor that opens a door like that is like, no, wait a minute, you have something and you got to keep pushing, because I think it's going to take you somewhere. And so people like that all the way along the way, and then eventually getting to San Diego and being offered this job, I was like, be careful what you wish for, or be careful what you swing at, because then it happened. And then I was like, how do I run a program?
Here we go.
Yeah, how do I run a program? What is curriculum? What? I've only ever thought of acting, and so
I do want to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
But I do also want to point out, and I don't know the statistics, but I'm going to surmise that there are not a lot of heads of MFA acting programs who are of color.
Yeah, I believe that's true. And even to take it a little further, Kim, that are not actors.
Who are not actors, okay.
And run acting programs.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? And I feel like the best artistic directors, and well, shoot, I'm really talking here. The best have been actors, or understand the artist easier if they were actors.
Yes.
You know what? And because the process is dual. They understand it from this way and this way. And so then it's like, hey, I get both aspects, as opposed to just really focusing on what it is to make money, what it is to just, truncate rehearsals. It's people that are like, hey, we need to give these people the space to create.
Yeah.
And once that starts happening, it's like, wow, forget about it,
Yeah, yeah. But then, so it seems to me then that you bring what is absolutely not just necessary, but critical to the evolution of theater and acting training in the country, because you are a bit of a bridge, it seems, right? I hate to like make it so binary like this, but old and new, classical, contemporary.
Yep.
And it seems to me that you kind of traffic in both worlds.
It's interesting. The technique should feed your work. you know, and if the technique is hindering your work or making you less yourself, it's hard to use the word authentic when you're telling other people's words as your own, you
Right.
know. But I feel like truthful, you know, you have to figure it out. I'm sorry, I'm getting off track here because
It's okay.
there's flyover there. I live in, you know, Bankers Hill.
Yeah, I know where you live.
And there's these flyovers and I'm like, oh man, the sound is getting crunched.
No, actually, we can still hear you.
Okay, great. But you know, I just wanted to say, not to take all this burden on my shoulders, you know, Kim, but the truth is, like, yes, people of color have to step into training the future of this art form. Otherwise, there's no entryway, you know, or there's no mirror image to the people saying, hey, I see myself, you know. What does it mean for a young person to go to the theater and continue to see white productions, you know? And so all of a sudden they start turning to their friends and being like, what are you doing after this thing, you know? And they're not engaged.
Yeah.
But if all of a sudden somebody speaks truthfully or has trained and knows how to take flight with language, and there's a person in the audience that it touches, you know, that's young and says, wow, I can do that too because of that guy. I feel like, yeah, let's get more of those guys. So how do we do that? Let's get more of those girls, those women. And how do we do that so that young people can be like, this is my art form too,
Yes.
you know? And the classics belong to us if we're just allowed. And so it becomes that thing where who's going to give us that entryway? And that's another part of me getting what I've always gotten, was that I was like, where is it? How do I get in? And I hate using the word infiltrate, but it is that thing where it's like, yeah, let's get in, let's crack it open a little bit and let me join it like this. But then once you start trusting me, I can start putting my voice more and more into the room, you know? And I'm a very private person, you know, Instagram and all of this, not really me, you know. But you know, I feel like when you get me one-on-one and start talking like in a more personal way, out of a forum setting, we can really get to some base and some truth, you know.
Well, now you have what, a year and a half of running the program at USD under your belt, right?
Yeah.
So how has that been?
It's been a ride. I mean, you know, I haven't had a normal year, as you know,
Yeah.
and it's been crazy. But I feel like there's a reason I'm here, you know, Kim. Like, I know I just got here and I had all these plans and, oh, here's the future and this is where we're going to move and we're going to shift this. And what about the curriculum doing this? And, you know, there's starting to be some movement, but there's some work, you know, as you know, when you join an institution, to get everybody on board.
Yeah.
And so little by little, I feel like as I was learning how to lead an acting program, they were learning how to deal with me as a leader, you know? And so as long as we were communicating, it was easy sailing. But there was bumps in the road, you know, because the classics are difficult, number one, you know, to bring to a contemporary audience and be like, wow, what about digging into this text that's archaic, cryptic, long sentence structure, you know, and it becomes really tough. And it's crazy because I haven't even started talking about Shakespeare, you know, and so it starts becoming that thing where it's like, how do you teach that, and who's teaching it, and who are we teaching it to? And the truth is, everybody to their own individual students. We have to look at our students that are crossing the threshold and ask them what they need. It's not about my agenda or the white agenda. It becomes like, hey, welcome. What do you need? And when we start there, Kim, I feel like we get information that's not, of course we have our curriculum and we say, hey, this is the arc of the class, but we start listening to them as individuals, because that's where the artist lives, in the individuality. So why not celebrate everybody's individuality, not just a certain group of people, you know? And I feel like our storytelling becomes that much richer because it reflects America. It reflects where we live, you know, how crazy and upside down it is. It's still,
Absolutely.
there's a lot going on, And it's
Yeah.
hard, and it's really hard to deny those voices and stories, you know?
It's so true.
And there's ways to somehow use all of this that we're gathering in our world today and take it back to the classics and reinvent them as plays that were just written yesterday. It's not an easy thing, and it doesn't come without cutting and trying to reinterpret and trying to make it a contemporary story. But I feel like people have to support the bending and flexibility of these texts because they've been around for so long for a reason. Let us mess with them a little bit, please. If you want the same production, just rent it. Now's the perfect time. By all
Yeah.
means, stream it, get it, watch it over and over. If you want the same repetitive thing, go for it. But if you want to show up to live theater, which is what we're missing right now, show up so that the energy and the chemicals in the room change because we're present together, you
Yes.
know? And that to me is like what we have to aim for. That doesn't have color,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
That's community. That's
Yeah.
gathering. That's
Yeah.
humanity. That's, hey, why can that person tell the story and not that person? You know, oh, because the name of that character is, and you're like, and? You know, so I just wonder, you know, and sure, sometimes it breaks the historical mold of where that story comes from. But I feel like we can always take it back there and have that discussion, you
Yes.
know?
Yes. These are texts that they will have the life that we give them, right? They don't just stop just
Yeah.
because we
And they can take it,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And we can't just let Europeans get away with it.
Right.
We have to start chipping away at these things. We have to be mavericks at it, you know? Another director I worked with that, you know, I hope goes back to the classic soon is Daniel Fish, you know, who just won a Tony for his Oklahoma. Yeah, do your thing, Daniel. But the truth is, I was inspired by how he shaped story with these old, archaic, classical texts and made them so contemporary. And I was like, that's what we have to do, you know? And Kim, he cast me in one of my first Shakespeare plays, and he cast me as Romeo, you know, kind of
Yes.
right out of Juilliard. And I was like, and he wasn't easy, you know. I heard he's gotten, you know, easier to work with. But and what I mean by that is he just knew what he wanted and was a director with a vision and didn't mince words. Was just like, hey, that's not it. Why not try it this way? It was never like, he was always working, solving, you know. And so to me, that was it. But I was like, how do I work with him? And then I get an audition for Romeo, and I'm like, how do I book this? You know, and he gave it to me. And once again, I got in his pocket, and he's like, hey, let's go do Hamlet. Have you ever played Laertes? You know, and I'm, no, what? So it just became that thing where it's like, where do we get access? And who are these directors that have the vision beyond this pigeonhole idea, as opposed to it just blowing up and being like, we don't know who's out there.
Yeah.
We don't know who's actually watching. If you're that person that's like, I know every subscriber, everybody that shows up to the theater, you don't. There's somebody that could have gotten a ticket that canceled, that somebody's sister is on the road or whatever, you know? All of a sudden it's like possibilities in the air. So
Yeah.
we have to take it as opposed
Absolutely.
to being like, oh no, we can only tell the stories this way. And I'm like, I don't get it. So let's run a classical training program and start shaping those ideas. And somebody has to help me because they're huge. So the faculty had to get behind all of this. But I feel like they're coming, Kim, and change is happening. And then COVID-19 happens and it forces change in a different way.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and you know, my girlfriend told me this, that one of her Yale professors told her, but you know, she said, champions adjust, Jess. So just adjust. And I was like, oh man, all of these sayings, you know, if I'm gonna do it 110%. If you're a champion, just adjust. And I'm like, oh, well, hey, let's do it. And
You
it's
know,
worked, you know.
I've always felt that theater is a kind of magical alchemy, right? That happens when artists meet story, meet audience, right? It's this big communal experience. And what you're talking about, this new world that we're living in. And I do want to acknowledge the tragedy of what, what's happening to Black lives and Black bodies. Um, we are already processing, the trauma of COVID-19. And then on top of that, we're processing the fact that injustice is still happening, even in spite of, sheltering in place or what have you.
Yeah.
And so artists right now, this generation of artists who are at home and experiencing this trauma in a certain way, I feel like the language of the classics which have been born out of violence and oppression and injustice, all of the things that we're seeing today, that it does offer opportunity for transformation in terms of storytelling. And so that alchemy, that I feel like you are now an agent of that, right? That you're creating the atmosphere for that beautiful alchemy to happen in a new way, with your vision and how you're leading your department and how you're leading your students. And so I personally, I feel so inspired by everything you're saying right now, because it makes me excited, not in spite of the trauma that's happening, but it makes me look forward to how the storytellers that you're educating are going to transform and interpret the world as they see it.
They have to take over. They have to. I mean, it'll save lives, and the truth is, one life, save one life, whatever it takes, because the truth is, we just have to give space.
Yeah.
We have to create that space. And it's hard to listen to what comes out in that space sometimes, especially if you get it to that place where there's trust. And I hate that I keep bringing that in, but all of a sudden, once you start trusting, in both directions, I feel like then you make work that matters.
Yeah.
Because then the conversation is going after something. There's a fire behind it, and so if we can shape and hone in on that fire and put it into your work and your text and your art, I mean, your truth will sing through a number of stories, and that's the thing. We don't know how certain things are going to resonate in the audience and be interpreted by certain people. So we just have to put it out there. And that's why I love talkbacks, Kim, because then we have to talk about it,
Yeah.
because I know every time, or at least for, I'm sure in no recent future, audiences are going to watch classical work and say, he shouldn't be doing it, and that's when it becomes that thing where it's like, how do we get them on the other side of that idea, and it's work, but I feel the more we do it, not forcing it, but the fact that we're trusted more, that then it'll become more normal, and people will be like, oh yeah, that's Hamlet.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course that's Juliet.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? As opposed
I
to being
do.
like, oh my God, what a drastic choice. They picked an Asian American to play Hermione. Oh my, and you're like, no, it's the world. And
Yes.
people make choices that are inexplicable to certain people, but to other people, it's normal.
Yeah.
So it's like, stop judging and open up.
Yeah.
Because then maybe some rearranging of ideas will happen.
Exactly.
That's where we can start,
Yes.
And that's only the beginning and scratching the surface, Kim. But let us rearrange a couple of ideas that you have that are maybe old themselves.
Yeah.
I
totally know.
Because
And Well, Jesse, listen, we have we actually don't have limited time left.
Oh, I didn't know. I thought we had all night, Kim. I'm sorry.
I wish.
I canceled everything
In person over drinks next time. But I wanted to give you the opportunity to, close with any other thoughts you had.
Wow. It's hard to close anything these days.
I know, right?
And it's tough to say goodbye to people, because what I miss the most, and I feel like, and I've said this to my students, us not being in the same space is unnatural, and I feel like this device, sure, I'll take it and we'll connect as best as we can, but I cannot wait to be in a room and be able to safely breathe each other's air.
Yeah.
And gather and tell stories and look into each other's eyes, or through masks or with gloves on, and figure out what the future of this art form is, because it's necessary. And I love that we can draw community from, like you were saying, the trauma and the pain. It hurts, but reach out. And sometimes the theater is the place to go. So if you feel like you want to tell stories and you want your voice out there and want to get it trained a little bit, by all means, we need you. Because after we get out of this situation, there's going to be a major renaissance, and we're going to need some artists that are going to step forward to tell everything that's been happening before this, after this, and what's going to lie in front of us in the future. And I also just wanted to present my little puppy dog before I leave, because I'm so in love with him, and I know he brings smiles to everybody. Milo says hello. I love you all. Kim, I can't thank you enough for having me on this program.
Jesse, thank you. This has been glorious. I so appreciate it. We will get back together in the rehearsal room, and and hopefully sooner than later.
I agree, and 57 Chevy, I know we didn't talk about it much, but you'll hear more about it down the line.
We will,
develop it, because it's an awesome piece about
really
a Mexican-American father, family, and taking a slice of the American dream. Come by.
All right. Jesse, much love to you, and we'll talk soon.
Bye. See you,
Bye.
Kim.